Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This audio uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. Today, we're going to be diving deep into From Beirut to Jerusalem. It won the Pulitzer,
Oh, yeah.
It's Thomas Friedman's account of the Middle East. It covers, the 70s and 80s.
He was right there in the thick of it.
Yeah, and he's a Jewish-American reporter, so he brings this really unique perspective.
Definitely. He blends his personal stories with some really sharp political analysis.
Not just a dry history book.
No, not at all. It's like you're right there with him, especially in Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War.
Oh, yeah. He talks about needing multiple press credentials from various militias, too, just to report on different parts of the city.
Wow. It really shows how power was so fragmented.
Yeah.
And how factionalism was on the rise.
Totally. He even describes Beirut as a city of versions.
A city of versions.
Yeah, where truth is, fragmented. It's elusive.
Almost like it's built on shifting sands, both literally and metaphorically.
And that idea really gets to the core of how complex that whole region is.
Yeah.
Makes you question, what is truth?
Yeah.
Especially in a conflict zone.
Absolutely.
And he has these vivid anecdotes.
Yeah.
There's one where a UPI bureau chief, I think he was juggling live cluster bomblets.
Oh, my God.
Right in front of a PLO spokesman.
That's wild.
What really struck me was how the people in Beirut, they seemed to just adapt to the violence. They became desensitized to it.
That's the psychological impact of living with constant conflict.
Right.
Friedman mentions a psychologist, Terry Prothero, I think it was, and they observed that the stress in Beirut, the sustained stress, it was just unlike anything they'd studied before.
Yeah. It really makes you think about the human cost.
Yeah.
Beyond just the immediate casualties.
Absolutely. How do individuals and societies cope with that level of chronic instability?
It's a question that kind of hangs over the whole book.
Yeah.
Then he introduces this concept of Hama rules.
Hama rules.
It's based on the Syrian government's response to the Muslim Brotherhood. It was back in the early 80s. They brutally crushed that uprising in Hama.
It's like a blueprint for authoritarian rule in the region.
Quote.
Solidifies that whole rule or die mentality.
And Friedman connects it to his encounters with Assad, Hafez al-Assad,
Right.
and Saddam Hussein.
Right.
And they understood how tribal their societies were.
And they knew how to exploit it for control.
Which is a stark reminder of how events can shape political realities for generations.
Oh, absolutely.
And Friedman argues that, the artificial borders, the ones drawn by colonial powers, that just made things worse. Those lines often ignored the existing tribal allegiances.
Right.
And all the power structure.
He uses examples like Lebanon, the Maronites there.
Yeah.
And Saudi Arabia, the Saud tribe. Even the Alawites and how they control Syria.
It's like these countries are trying to work with a political system.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't fit their social fabric at all.
Exactly.
Friedman also spends a good amount of time on the PLO. He traces their rise and fall.
Under Arafat?
Yep, Yasser Arafat. You get a sense of him as a tragic figure almost.
Yeah.
He's always walking this tightrope, dealing with all these pressures.
Both internal and external, I imagine.
Exactly. And there's this one anecdote. Arafat's showing off a communique. All proud. Right?
Oh, yeah.
But it had been edited by the Jordanians.
Really?
To make the PLO stance weaker.
Wow. It really shows how they were constantly struggling, trying to stay independent from those other Arab states.
While also trying to advance the Palestinian cause. Makes you wonder if any leader can be effective when they're constantly beholden to all these competing interests.
It's a tough spot to be in.
Then in 1987, bam, the Intifada erupts.
The Palestinian uprising.
Yeah. Friedman describes it as this outburst of anger and frustration.
Years of occupation.
And just a sense of hopelessness.
This all just boiled over.
And it became a turning point.
How so?
Well, the world could no longer ignore the Palestinians.
They were front and center.
And Friedman analyzes the stone as this weapon of resistance.
Right.
Rejection, right, of Israeli occupation. But also what Palestinians saw as Arab apathy.
Powerful symbol.
Yeah, it really was. And then the spotlight shifts to Israel.
In a way it hadn't before.
Exactly. The Intifada brought so much attention to the Palestinian issue.
Much more than Lebanon ever did, huh?
Yeah. And Friedman contrasts how the media covered the two. Yeah. He argues that, with the Intifada, the images were just so visceral. They exposed the brutality. It forced the world to pay attention.
Yeah.
But then it also kind of fostered this sense of, Palestinian strength.
and maybe even Israeli victimhood.
Right, which, further complicates things.
Media coverage really can shape how people perceive these conflicts.
Totally. And he even suggests that Western media, influenced by biblical narratives, might have contributed to this. Israelis as victims, Palestinians as aggressors.
He makes a good point about the biblical narrative.
Yeah.
He points out that because Palestinians don't feature in that narrative, their suffering doesn't resonate as much.
It's like cultural biases can influence how we see events.
Even tragic ones.
So much to unpack here. And then you add in Friedman's background.
As a Jewish American.
Yeah. It just adds another layer to his analysis.
He's grappling with his own identity while witnessing this reality on the ground.
Exactly. And he doesn't shy away from that conflict, trying to reconcile being Jewish with what he saw.
It adds so much depth to his analysis. He forces himself and us to face some really tough questions about morality and justice.
So you have this web, right, of personal experience, political analysis, and moral reflection. And it's all coming together.
Fascinating.
Then Friedman gets into the different perspectives in Israel. He shows a nation grappling with its identity and future.
That's where we'll pick up next time, then, exploring the internal divisions and debates within Israel.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so Friedman dives into all those different perspectives inside Israel. It's like all these debates raging at the time.
Yeah, like he shows a whole spectrum. You've got the secular Zionists.
Right.
They saw Israel as like a purely national thing.
And then on the other end, you have the ultra-Orthodox.
Yeah.
They believe Israel only matters religiously, like it only truly becomes a state with the Messiah.
And then in between, somewhere, are the religious Zionists.
Groups like Gush Emunim.
Right. They think settling the West Bank is like a divine command.
Which just adds this whole other layer to the conflict.
Totally. It mixes religion and politics. It's a tough knot to untangle.
Definitely.
Right.
And then you have secular Israelis.
A lot of them, they love the land.
Of course.
But they see the occupation as this, like, burden.
A security burden.
Yeah.
And a moral one, too.
Exactly.
So you have these two completely different visions for the future.
It's like, how do you even begin to reconcile those?
Yeah, and it's not just within Israel itself.
That's right.
Friedman also talks about the tension
between American Jews and Israeli Jews.
Yeah, especially around religious pluralism.
Like the whole who is a Jew debate.
Which really exposed this growing gap
between how American Jews live
and the reality for Israelis.
Exactly.
It's like two different worlds.
Two different understandings of what it means to be Jewish.
American Jews are often more, integrated.
Safe and secure.
Yeah. They might not get the anxieties or the siege mentality that's so strong in Israel.
And then Israelis, a lot of them, they see American Jews as kind of naive.
Like they can't grasp those existential threats.
Exactly.
And Friedman suggests that disconnect is just getting wider.
Which is a pretty worrying thought.
It makes you wonder about the future of the diaspora.
Yeah.
And their whole relationship with Israel.
Right. How do those different experiences shape their views? Their views of the conflict, but also their vision for the future.
It's such a complex issue.
Friedman doesn't hold back. He really gets into those tough questions.
And all of this is happening against the backdrop of geopolitics.
It's like this whole other layer of complexity.
Totally.
Yeah.
He analyzes how the U.S.-Israel relationship changed, especially during the Reagan years.
It's really interesting to see how realpolitik works.
Yeah, he talks about how Israel shifted its image.
From the underdog.
Yeah.
To this strategic asset for America.
It wasn't just about shared values anymore.
Right. It became about aligning interests, achieving goals.
Realpolitik in action.
And Friedman has all these anecdotes, about interacting with people like Arafat and Shamir.
Shamir, the Israeli prime minister.
Yeah, Yitzhak Shamir. Those stories really make the whole thing come alive.
It's like you're getting this peek behind the curtain, seeing the human side of these big figures.
So after painting this, pretty bleak picture, what solutions does Friedman actually offer?
Well, this is where things get a bit controversial. He brings up this idea of a tribal solution.
Tribal solution.
Basically, he's saying peace based on reconciliation. It's just not going to happen.
Because of all mistrust?
Right. Too much baggage, too much bad blood. He thinks the only option is separation.
Like a clear division.
Of land and resources.
With security for both sides.
Exactly. It's a sobering thought.
But it comes from someone who saw all those peace efforts fail.
Right. He was right there.
It's not a perfect solution. He admits that.
It's not about building bridges or kumbaya moments.
Definitely not.
It's about facing reality.
Yeah, creating a framework where these two groups
Who really don't trust each other
can at least coexist.
without fighting constantly.
Right. He thinks that's the most realistic way.
To achieve some stability.
In this region that's just burdened by history.
And fueled by anxiety.
It's bold. A lot of people have argued about it.
Oh, for sure. But Friedman saw how other things didn't work.
And this tribal solution, even if it's not perfect.
It might be the least bad option.
Yeah.
He's basically saying, let's stop pretending.
Let's deal with what's actually happening.
Create a system where both sides feel secure.
So they can eventually build a future.
Even if it's not based on love and understanding.
It's definitely a sobering thought.
He's not offering easy answers. Or sugarcoating anything.
He wants us to face the hard truths.
And consider solutions that might not feel good.
But might be the only way to stop the cycle of violence.
It leaves you with this question. Can two groups with such different stories, such different histories, can they actually live side by side?
Not as enemies, but as neighbors.
Maybe not sharing a meal, but at least respecting each other's right to exist.
It's a question that still matters today. Decades after Friedman wrote the book.
Yeah.
It's a journey for sure. And he doesn't just analyze, from a distance. He puts you right there.
You really feel like you're experiencing it alongside him.
Yeah, the sights and sounds, even the smells.
He's so good at describing things.
You can almost feel the tension at a checkpoint or hear Beirut during a bombing.
It's vivid.
His description of meeting Arafat really stuck with me.
Yeah.
He comes across as both charismatic,
A real leader.
but also flawed, like a real human being.
Caught up in all of it.
What was your take on Arafat from the book?
Well, he's definitely complex. You can see he's got this charm, and he knows how to play the game.
Yeah, he gets symbolism. He understands how to use spectacle.
But at the same time, he seems trapped.
By the expectations and just his position and everything.
I don't think you come away with a simple judgment about Arafat, which I think is a testament to Friedman's writing.
It's that complexity that makes the book so good.
Yeah.
There are no easy answers.
No simple solutions.
It really forces you to think about the contradictions.
And the ambiguities.
And Friedman doesn't shy away from criticizing either side.
Right. He calls out the Palestinians.
For being too reliant on media attention.
And the Israelis, he criticizes them too.
For that siege mentality.
He's not afraid to point out those flaws.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes his analysis so powerful. He's willing to challenge everyone.
It gives him credibility.
In the end, I felt this mix of despair.
Despair, yeah. But also a little bit of optimism.
Right, like it feels so intractable, the whole conflict.
It does.
But then, maybe, just maybe, if we understand it better and face those hard truths.
Maybe then some kind of coexistence is possible.
It's a powerful idea, and it feels relevant even now.
More than just a book about the 70s and 80s.
Right, it's about conflict in general.
About identity.
Even our search for meaning in a world that feels chaotic.
Absolutely.
From Beirut to Jerusalem is a book that stays with you.
It really makes you think about your own assumptions and how you see history.
And Friedman is such a good writer. He takes you right there.
The streets of Beirut.
The checkpoints.
The halls of power.
He weaves those personal stories into the bigger picture. The history, the politics.
And he even uses humor.
Even in those dark moments.
It's what makes the book so unique.
It's challenging, sometimes uncomfortable.
But that's what makes it so valuable.
It forces us to look at the Middle East.
To see beyond the headlines.
And to remember the human stories. The ones that often get lost.
If you want a book that'll really make you think about the Middle East, challenge your ideas. From Beirut to Jerusalem, is it?
It's a journey.
Led by a sharp observer.
It's a book that matters, especially today.
As we try to figure out, the legacy of all this conflict and how to find some lasting peace.
And remember, understanding is the first step.
To having real dialogue and finding solutions that lead to a better future.
If you're interested, you can find a link to the book in our show notes.
From Beirut to Jerusalem.
And be sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives like this. Books that make us think and help us understand our world better.